"Everything goes to your sister," Mr. Caldwell read, his voice calm and detached, as if he hadn't just ripped apart the last shred of hope I had left. The mahogany-paneled office seemed smaller, the air pressing down on my chest like an unbearable weight. I sat still, hands folded in my lap, my pulse steady, though I could feel the heat rising in my face. I refused to let Jessica see even the slightest flicker of emotion. Across from me, Jessica Morgan Pierce tilted her head slightly, a slow, victorious smirk spreading across her lips. Sunlight streamed through the window, catching the diamonds on her bracelet, the very same one my father had gifted her last year. Just another reminder of where I stood in his eyes. Jessica had always been his favorite. She had played the role perfectly, poised, obedient, ambitious. The CEO in waiting. The daughter who married well, raised the right kind of children, and upheld the Morgan name with the dignity my father had so carefully constructed. And me? Alexandra Morgan, the disappointment, a marine biologist instead of a corporate executive, divorced from the man my father had handpicked for me, independent, unapologetically forging my own path, a path he had never approved of. The properties at 1542 Pine Grove Avenue, 789 Lakeview Drive, and the Newport summer home, all to Jessica Morgan Pierce. Mr. Caldwell continued, adjusting his glasses. The family business, Morgan Communications, including all assets and subsidiaries, also to Jessica Morgan Pierce. Jessica leaned back in her chair, practically glowing, her fingers tracing the expensive fabric of her designer dress. Her nails were immaculately painted, her hair styled to perfection. She had dressed for this occasion, knowing exactly what was coming. She turned to me, voice dripping with feigned sympathy. "Oh, Lexi, I'm so sorry. But you know how Dad felt about your choices?" I met her gaze, unflinching. "I'm well aware, Jessica." Mr. Caldwell cleared his throat, shifting uncomfortably. "There is a small personal effects account set aside for Alexandra, containing family photographs and some heirloom jewelry from her grandmother." Jessica let out a soft laugh, shaking her head. "Well, at least you got the family photos. Not sure where you'll put them in that tiny apartment of yours." I stood, smoothing my dress. "Are we finished here, Mr. Caldwell?" He nodded, looking relieved that I wasn't making a scene. I wasn't about to give Jessica the satisfaction of seeing me break. Jessica's voice called after me as I reached the door. "Don't worry, Lexi. I'll make sure you're taken care of. Maybe there's even a position for you at Morgan Communications. Something entry-level, of course." I turned back, offering her a small, knowing smile. "That's generous, Jessica, but I'll be just fine." The drive home was quiet, the golden-red autumn leaves swirling on the pavement beneath my tires. Mom had always loved this time of year. She would have hated what Dad had done today. My phone buzzed on the passenger seat, a text from Jessica. "Dinner tonight? We should talk about your future." I ignored it, just like I had ignored every empty gesture she had made since Dad's funeral last week. Instead, I pulled into the driveway of my tiny apartment, a charming craftsman home I had purchased, mortgage-free, 3 years ago. Jessica would never understand what that meant. To her, wealth was about status, about ownership, about control. To me, it had always been about freedom. The moment I stepped inside, I went straight to my office, unlocked the bottom drawer of my desk and pulled out a thick manila envelope. Mom had given it to me 2 years ago, just months before she passed away. "Don't open this until after your father is gone," she had whispered, her frail hands gripping mine tightly. "Promise me, Alexandra." I had promised. And now as I carefully peeled back the flap, I finally understood why. Inside were pages upon pages of documents. At the very top, a letter in my mother's elegant handwriting. "My dearest Alexandra, if you are reading this, then your father is gone, and I can only assume he has done exactly what I feared. Your father was a brilliant businessman, but he never understood what truly mattered. He let his pride and outdated beliefs blind him to the most valuable thing he had. A daughter with vision, with integrity, with the heart to change the world. What he never realized is that while he was busy building Morgan Communications, I was quietly building something of my own. 20 years ago, I began investing in sustainable technology companies. Your research on marine conservation inspired me. While your father dismissed your work as childish idealism, I saw the future. These holdings have grown considerably, worth far more than Morgan Communications. Everything is in your name, transferred legally over time through a network of investments your father never thought to question. Jessica cannot touch a single cent of it. Use it wisely, my darling girl. Make the difference I always knew you could. All my love, Mom. My hands trembled as I sifted through the paperwork, stock certificates, investment portfolios, offshore accounts. An empire quietly built under my father's nose. He had never even suspected. I let out a slow breath, the weight of my mother's secret settling into my bones. My phone buzzed again. Jessica. Seriously, Lexi, we need to talk. Dad would have wanted us to work together. This time my pulse remained steady. I picked up my phone, typed a response, and hit send. You're right. We should talk. Why don't you come over tomorrow morning? I have something to show you. That night, I stayed up late, poring over Mom's documents. She had invested in wind farms, solar technology, ocean cleanup initiatives, everything I had dedicated my career to. While Dad had dismissed my work as nonsense, Mom had been securing the future. Tomorrow, Jessica would finally see the truth. At exactly 10 a.m., the doorbell rang. I took a slow, measured breath before opening the door. Jessica Morgan Pierce stood on my porch, impeccably dressed as always. A tailored navy coat hugged her figure, her chestnut-colored hair sleek and controlled. She gave me a tight-lipped smile, but her eyes flickered with something unreadable. "Morning, Lexi," she said, her tone artificially warm. Her gaze shifted past me, taking in my house, a place she had always considered beneath the Morgan name. "Shall we?" I stepped aside, allowing her in without a word. She walked in, her heels clicking softly against the hardwood floor as she surveyed my home with barely concealed disdain. "We really need to talk about getting you set up properly," she said, brushing invisible lint off her coat. "This isn't the kind of place a Morgan should be living in." I ignored the dig and led her into the dining room. The table was neatly arranged with the documents from my mother's envelope: legal papers, stock certificates, investment portfolios. Everything laid out in perfect order, waiting. "You're right, Jessica," I said, motioning for her to sit. "We do need to talk. There's something Mom wanted you to see." She hesitated for a fraction of a second before lowering herself gracefully into the chair. Her manicured fingers smoothed the fabric of her dress as she studied me. "What is all this?" she asked, glancing at the paperwork but not yet reaching for it. I met her gaze head-on. "Take a look." She picked up the first document, her brow furrowing as she skimmed through it, then another, and another. Her movements became more frantic, her perfectly composed mask starting to slip. Her lips parted slightly, her breath catching. This isn't possible." "Oh, it's very possible," I replied, watching her closely. Jessica's face turned pale, then flushed an angry shade of red as she flipped through page after page. She finally reached my mother's letter, the part where everything had been transferred into my name. Her hands trembled slightly as she read it. I leaned back in my chair, waiting. Jessica exhaled sharply, shaking her head. "This doesn't make any sense. Mom was just a housewife. She didn't know anything about business." I almost laughed. "No, Jessica, that's what you and Dad always believed. But Mom was never just a housewife. She was playing a long game while you were too busy looking down on her." Jessica swallowed hard, her eyes scanning the papers again, as if willing them to change. "This is worth billions," she whispered. I nodded. "More than Morgan Communications." She looked at me sharply. "And you've known about this?" "For 2 years," I said. "But I didn't open it until after Dad died. That was Mom's instruction." Jessica's jaw tightened, and for a brief moment I saw the panic in her expression. She had spent her entire life being groomed for power, believing she was the rightful heir to everything our family had built. Now, She was realizing that the biggest legacy of all had slipped right through her fingers, and it was mine. But Jessica was nothing if not a strategist. She took a deep breath, her mask of composure snapping back into place. "We could work together," she said, her voice smooth, persuasive. "Think about it, Lexi. With Morgan Communications infrastructure and your investments, we could build something even bigger than what Mom started. We could—" "No," I interrupted, keeping my voice even. "That's not what Mom wanted, and it's not what I want." Her expression darkened. "Lexi, don't be stupid. Do you have any idea how much power we'd have if we combined forces? With my business acumen and your—" I tilted my head. "My what, Jessica? My idealistic nonsense?" Her mouth snapped shut. She knew she had said those exact words before. I exhaled, keeping my gaze steady. "This isn't about power for me. It's about impact. Mom trusted me to handle this, and I won't let her down." Jessica's lips pressed into a thin line. For a brief second, there was something almost vulnerable in her expression. Then, just as quickly, it vanished. "You're making a mistake," she said, standing abruptly. I gave her a small, unreadable smile. "Maybe, but at least it's mine to make." Jessica held my gaze for a long moment, her nails tapping against the table in frustration. Then, without another word, she turned on her heel and strode toward the door, her heels clicking against the floor like gunfire. She paused at the threshold, glancing back at me. "This isn't over, Lexi." I leaned against the dining table, arms crossed. "Oh, I know." The door shut behind her and I let out a slow breath. Jessica never accepted losing, and this time, she had lost everything she thought was hers. That evening, as I settled into my couch with a glass of wine, my phone buzzed again. I glanced at the screen. "Aunt Patricia." "Alexandra, how could you do this to your sister? Your father would be devastated." I rolled my eyes. "Right on schedule." I scrolled further. From Cousin Michael. "Let's talk business. I have some great investment opportunities we could explore." From some distant relative I barely remembered. "Hey, Lexi, we should catch up soon. It's been too long." The vultures had already started circling. I set my phone aside, shaking my head. Mom had been right. The moment people smelled money, they came crawling out of the woodwork. Instead of answering, I walked to my office and pulled out a fresh notebook. It was time to make a plan. Mom's empire wasn't about wealth. It was about creating change. And I had every intention of making sure her vision came to life. Jessica could fight all she wanted. The truth was, she had spent her entire life chasing a legacy that didn't belong to her. But I had something better, a purpose, and I wasn't about to let anyone take it away. The next morning, I woke up to 14 missed calls and a flood of texts. Jessica had wasted no time. "Aunt Patricia, Alexandra, this is unacceptable. Your father would be devastated. Cousin Michael, we should discuss investment opportunities. Let's meet soon. Uncle Robert, call me immediately. We need to talk about the family name." I sighed, tossing my phone onto the desk. It had taken less than 24 hours for the Morgan family to mobilize, but I wasn't in the mood to deal with their outrage. Instead, I had more important matters to handle. By noon, I was sitting in the sleek, modern offices of Harrison & Associates, a law firm my mother had quietly worked with for years. Unlike Mr. Caldwell, my father's old-school corporate lawyer, Sarah Harrison was sharp, modern, and utterly unshakable. "Right on schedule," Sarah said as she gestured for me to sit. "Your mother predicted Jessica would try to contest the estate within days of finding out." I settled into the chair across from her desk. "I assume we're prepared?" Sarah smiled. "More than prepared. Your mother built an airtight case." She slid a thick folder toward me. "Jessica might try to challenge this by claiming your mother was mentally unfit when she made these transfers. But we have years of documentation, investment records, financial meetings, and even recorded conversations with advisors. Your mother was meticulous." I smirked. Of course she was. Sarah leaned forward slightly. "And there's more." I raised an eyebrow as she pulled out another document. "Your mother also left instructions regarding Morgan Communications." Sarah continued. She suspected your father's company might try to obstruct her environmental initiatives, so she put measures in place to ensure they couldn't. I took the papers from her, scanning the details. Mom had anticipated everything. A slow smile spread across my face. Jessica thought she had all the power. She was about to find out just how wrong she was. That evening, as I pulled into my driveway, I wasn't surprised to see Jessica's Mercedes parked out front. She was sitting on my porch steps, her usually perfect posture slightly slumped, her face set in an unreadable expression. I stepped out of my car, folding my arms. Back so soon? Jessica stood, brushing off her coat. We need to talk. I sighed, unlocking the door. Fine, come in. Unlike yesterday, she didn't make any comments about my house or my furniture. Instead, she followed me to the dining room and sat down at the same table where she had first seen the documents. I waited. She took a deep breath, then looked at me. I spoke to the board at Morgan Communications today. I raised an eyebrow. And? Jessica hesitated, then exhaled sharply. Our stock dropped. When news got out about Mom's investments, investors started pulling back. I wasn't surprised. Jessica continued. Investors are nervous. They're questioning our direction. The board is panicking. I crossed my arms. Sounds like a you problem. Jessica's eyes darkened. No, Lexi, it's an us problem. This is our family's reputation. I let out a dry laugh. Jessica, you cut me out of the family business. I wasn't even worth $1 in Dad's will. But now, suddenly, it's Anu's problem? Her jaw tightened. You don't understand. People are saying Dad was so obsessed with grooming me for leadership that he ignored what Mom was building. They're calling him outdated, short-sighted. I shrugged. They're not wrong. Jessica flinched, then shook her head. This isn't just about Dad's reputation. Morgan Communications is in trouble. If we don't adapt, we could lose everything. I studied her carefully. For the first time, there was no smugness, no superiority, just uncertainty. I don't want to fight you on this, Lexi, she admitted. We need each other. I tilted my head. Need me? Or need Mom's money? Jessica sighed. Both. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then I walked to my desk, opened my laptop, and pulled up a presentation I had been working on. I turned the screen toward her. These are projections for the next 10 years, I said. Climate change impact on coastal businesses, environmental regulation trends, sustainable technology market growth. Jessica's eyes flicked over the data, her mind working. Morgan Communications is outdated, I continued. Dad built a company for the past. Mom built one for the future. Jessica was silent for a long time. Then, slowly, she nodded. Morgan Communications could adapt, she said almost to herself. I raised an eyebrow. With my money? With your investment, she corrected smoothly. Think about it, Lexi. We could honor both our parents' legacies, merge the companies, modernize Dad's approach. You'd be in control. I leaned back, and you'd remain in power. Jessica didn't answer right away. When she finally spoke, her voice was quieter. I don't know how to do this without you, Lexi, she admitted. Dad always said we were stronger together. I stared at her for a long time. Dad said a lot of things, I murmured, and he was wrong about most of them. Jessica swallowed, then stood abruptly. Think about it, she said, gathering her coat. I'll be in touch. She left without another word. I sat there for a long time, staring at my laptop. Then slowly, I closed it. Jessica was right about one thing. This was just the beginning. The moment I stepped onto my porch that evening, I wasn't surprised to find Jessica waiting. She sat on the front steps, arms crossed tightly over her chest, her perfectly styled hair slightly disheveled. The Jessica I had always known, the one who moved through the world with absolute certainty, wasn't here. Instead, there was someone else, someone who looked lost. I exhaled and unlocked the door. Come inside. She hesitated for a fraction of a second, then stood, brushing off her coat as if regaining some sense of control. She followed me into the house, saying nothing as she stepped inside. For the first time, she didn't immediately criticize my home. She didn't scan the furniture with thinly veiled judgment or comment on how a Morgan should live in something more respectable. She just stood there, silent. "I spoke to the board today," she finally said, her voice quieter than usual. I nodded. "I figured you would." She inhaled deeply, then let out a slow breath. "Investors are panicking. They're questioning everything. Dad's leadership, my leadership. The stock dropped again today. Another 15%. I stayed silent, waiting. She ran a hand through her hair, something I had never seen her do before. "They called an emergency session this morning. Some of the board members are pushing for me to step down as CEO. They think I mishandled everything, that I failed to anticipate what Mom was doing, failed to adapt." She let out a bitter laugh. "For years, I thought I was doing exactly what Dad trained me to do. Protect the company, keep it strong. But I never saw what was coming. I never saw her." Jessica turned to me, her expression raw in a way I had never seen before. Mom outplayed us both. I leaned against the arm of my couch, arms crossed. "She didn't outplay me," I said simply. Jessica flinched, but nodded. "No, she didn't." There was a long pause before she spoke again, and when she did, her voice was barely above a whisper. "I don't want to lose everything, Lexi, but I don't want to fight you anymore either." I studied her carefully. The Jessica I had grown up with, the one who had always tried to undermine me, outshine me, diminish me, would never say something like that. But maybe, just maybe, losing everything had forced her to see things differently. I walked to my desk, picked up a folder, and held it out to her. She frowned. "What's this?" "Mom set this up years ago," I said. "She wanted to give you an opportunity to do something meaningful. It's a fund, one dedicated to environmental education initiatives, the same programs she quietly funded while you and Dad were focused on the company." Jessica hesitated, then slowly opened the file. Her breath caught as she read the first page. Her hands trembled slightly as she flipped through the documents. I could see her swallowing down her emotions, forcing herself to stay composed, but the shock was still there. "You're giving me this?" she finally asked. I nodded. "If you want it." She let out a small, disbelieving laugh, shaking her head. "You're serious?" "Dead serious." Jessica exhaled, blinking rapidly, as if processing something too big to grasp all at once. "Mom always had a way of forcing us to be better, didn't she?" I smiled. "Yeah, she did." She looked down at the file again. "What exactly does this mean? What would I be doing?" "You'd be running it, developing programs, securing partnerships, helping fund research. Mom believed that education was the key to real change. She wanted people to understand the long-term impact of sustainability, how it connects to business, policy, and everyday life. She left it for you because she thought someday you might be ready." Jessica's jaw tightened. "And you think I'm ready?" I tilted my head. "I think you have a choice. You can keep trying to fight for something that's slipping away, something built on outdated values. Or you can build something new, something that actually matters." Jessica let out a long breath, gripping the edges of the file. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The weight of the years, the rivalry, the resentment, the battle for our father's approval, hung between us. Then she slowly nodded. "Okay." I arched an eyebrow. "Okay?" Her lips twitched slightly. "Okay, I'll do it, but don't expect me to become some tree-hugging environmentalist overnight." I laughed. "Wouldn't dream of it." For the first time in years, Jessica and I sat together. Not as enemies, not as competitors, but as something closer to what we once were. Sisters. Jessica wasn't perfect. Neither was I. But maybe, just maybe, Mom had left enough behind to change us both, and that was a legacy worth protecting.